The royal residence was a place of deep tradition, where every inch of the building carried the weight of history. The guards who walked the halls were not just there for protection, they were part of that history too, entrusted with keeping the royal family safe and preserving the secrets of the palace. One evening, as the guard carried out his usual duties, something unusual caught his attention. It was late, and the palace had settled into an almost eerie quiet. The hallways, usually bustling with activity during the day, were now empty, save for the faint sound of his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. He moved through the corridors, pausing occasionally to check that everything was in order. His job was simple but important: maintain the security of the residence, ensuring that nothing out of the ordinary occurred. Yet, as he made his way to one of the royal suites, something stopped him in his tracks. The door to the private chambers was slightly open. It wasn't uncommon for staff to leave doors ajar while attending to their duties, but this one was different. There was no light spilling out from under the door, and the air felt still, as if something was hidden within. It wasn't a feeling the guard was accustomed to. His instincts told him that something was not quite right. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to push the door open or retreat. The guard knew this room was one of the most private spaces in the entire palace. It belonged to a member of the royal family, and only the closest, most trusted individuals were allowed inside. He couldn't remember the last time he had been given permission to enter this room. It wasn't something that happened often, and when it did, it was always with a specific purpose in mind. His job was to guard the palace, not to explore its secrets. But tonight, something about the open door was too intriguing to ignore. He carefully pushed the door open, the faintest creak echoing in the stillness of the room. His eyes immediately went to the wardrobe against the far wall. It was an impressive piece of furniture, tall and ornate, made of dark wood with intricate carvings that seemed to tell their own story. The wardrobe was slightly ajar, just enough to make him wonder why it wasn't fully closed. The guard had seen this wardrobe before. It was a well-known fixture in the royal suite, but he had never seen it opened like this. The room, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight that filtered through the windows, felt like a step back in time. The guard knew that royal chambers were meant to be preserved, every item in them carefully selected and placed. Nothing was ever out of place, and certainly nothing was ever left open or exposed without a reason. As he approached the wardrobe, a feeling of unease began to creep over him. His fingers brushed against the edge of the door, the cool wood sending a shiver up his spine. It wasn't that he was afraid of what he might find. It was more the sense that this moment, this discovery, was somehow significant. He paused, weighing the decision in his mind. Should he leave it alone, as he had been taught to do with anything involving the royal family's private matters? Or should he open the wardrobe and see what lay inside? For a moment, the guard simply stood there, staring at the wardrobe. He could hear the faint hum of the palace's ventilation system in the background, the only sound in an otherwise quiet room. His hand hovered near the door, uncertain. But then the curiosity that had been gnawing at him pushed him to act. Slowly, cautiously, he opened the wardrobe further. The sight that greeted him was unexpected. The interior of the wardrobe was lined with soft velvet, a rich, deep red color that stood in stark contrast to the dark wood. The wardrobe was filled with neatly arranged clothing, much of it royal in nature. But among the dresses, coats, and gowns, there was something that stood out. At the very back, carefully draped over a mannequin, was a robe unlike anything he had ever seen before. The robe shimmered in the dim light, its rich fabric catching the moonlight in a way that made it appear almost otherworldly. The guard was transfixed. He had seen many royal garments in his time, but none like this. The robe was magnificent, its intricate embroidery depicting designs that seemed to tell a story all their own. There were symbols of the monarchy, delicate patterns of gold thread and gemstones that caught the light and sparkled as if they were alive. It was clear that this was no ordinary garment. As he took a step closer, the guard felt a deep sense of reverence. The robe was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his time at the palace. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of something much greater. He knew immediately what it was. This was the late Queen's coronation robe, the very garment she had worn on one of the most important days in British history. The robe that had been worn to mark her ascension to the throne. The guard stood in awe of the robe, his mind racing as he realized the significance of what he had found. It was a piece of royal history, a garment that symbolized the monarchy's strength, tradition, and continuity. The coronation robe was a powerful symbol of the Queen's reign, and now it was right before him, hidden away in this private space. He reached out to touch the fabric, his fingers grazing the delicate embroidery. It felt cool to the touch, as if it had been preserved in time. The robe was still in pristine condition, despite the years that had passed since it had last been worn. It was as if it had been waiting for someone to discover it, as if it was meant to be kept safe in this secret place for generations to come. For a long moment, the guard simply stood there, mesmerized by the beauty of the robe. He had been trained to understand the importance of security, to know the value of protecting the royal family and their belongings. But this was different. This wasn't just about security. It was about history, legacy, and the weight of the past. As the guard continued to gaze at the robe, a thought crossed his mind. What was it doing here? Why had it been hidden away in this private wardrobe? Surely such an important piece of history should have been preserved in a more public place, like the royal collection or a museum. But here it was, tucked away in the back of a wardrobe as if it were just another piece of clothing. The guard felt a sense of unease. He knew he wasn't supposed to be here, that this wardrobe was meant to remain undisturbed. The robes, the gowns, the relics of the royal family, they were not for ordinary eyes. Yet here he was, standing before one of the most important symbols of the monarchy, alone and in awe. He stepped back, closing the wardrobe carefully, as though he were sealing away a secret. The robe was once again hidden from view, tucked away in the shadows, but the guard knew he couldn't forget what he had seen. The weight of the discovery would stay with him, a secret he would carry with him for the rest of his life. For now, the room was quiet again. The only sound was the soft click of the wardrobe door closing. The guard stood still, his mind racing with the significance of what had just occurred. The coronation robe, a piece of history, was now hidden from view, and he was the only one who knew its secret. With a deep breath, the guard turned and left the room, his heart still racing. He had just encountered something extraordinary, something that no one else would ever know about. The palace was full of secrets, and now he was a part of one of its most hidden stories. The guard couldn't shake the image of the robe from his mind. It was as if the moment had been imprinted on his memory, each intricate detail of the fabric and the delicate embroidery engraved into his thoughts. It was rare that he encountered anything so personal, so steeped in history. The robe had felt almost alive, as though it held the essence of the Queen's reign within its folds, waiting for someone to uncover it. But now that he had seen it, he felt a strange sense of responsibility, as though he were holding a secret too important to reveal. Over the next few days, the guard carried on with his duties, but his thoughts often drifted back to the wardrobe and the hidden coronation robe. It was as though the discovery had taken root in him, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had found. There was something about the robe, its beauty, its history, and the sheer weight of what it represented, that kept drawing him back. He had never been one to pry into the royal family's private matters. His job was simple: ensure the safety of the residents and the people within it. But the robe had changed that. It had shifted something in him, making him question the boundaries between duty and curiosity. Was it wrong to have uncovered such a personal item? Should he have simply left it untouched as he was trained to do? The guard couldn't answer those questions. What he did know was that the robe, hidden away in the wardrobe, was no longer just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol, a connection to something far greater than himself. Days passed, but the unease lingered. The palace continued its daily rhythm, with staff moving through the halls and royal family members attending to their respective duties. But the guard felt increasingly distant from it all. He was carrying a secret now, one that weighed heavily on him. He had never been a part of something so profound, so tied to the history of the monarchy. Yet here he was, alone with his thoughts, struggling with the burden of that discovery. One evening, as he made his rounds, the guard found himself once again standing outside the door to the private chambers. The memory of the robe flashed in his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was still there, hidden away in the wardrobe. The thought of the robe, so beautifully preserved, filled him with a sense of awe and reverence. He knew that the Queen's coronation had been one of the most important events in British history, and the robe was an integral part of that legacy. It was something that belonged to the nation, not just to the royal family. But here it was, tucked away in a private space, unseen by anyone except the guard and those few who had access to this part of the palace. His curiosity got the best of him again. The guard knew that he was not supposed to be in this room, but the allure of the robe was too strong to ignore. He stood outside the door, listening to the soft hum of the palace around him. The air felt thick with anticipation, as though the palace itself was waiting for him to make a decision. With a deep breath, the guard gently pushed the door open. He stepped inside, the familiar silence greeting him like an old friend. The room was dimly lit, the soft light from the candles flickering in the distance. His eyes immediately went to the wardrobe, now closed and still. It almost seemed like the robe was calling to him, urging him to return and gaze upon it once more. This time, however, he didn't just open the wardrobe and admire the robe from a distance. He stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the door. There was something almost sacred about this moment, something that felt like an intrusion, but he couldn't stop himself. Slowly, carefully, he opened the wardrobe again. The robe lay just as it had before, but now there was something different about it. It felt like it had been waiting for him to return, as though it recognized him and had chosen him to uncover its secret. The guard stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. He had thought that seeing the robe once would be enough. But now that he was standing before it again, he realized how wrong he had been. This was more than just a garment. It was a connection to the past, a reminder of the Queen's reign and the monarchy's strength and continuity. His fingers brushed the fabric once more, this time with a deeper sense of reverence. The robe seemed to shimmer in the dim light, its gold threads catching the flicker of the candles. He traced the intricate designs, the symbols that adorned the fabric, and he felt a wave of respect for the woman who had worn it. The Queen had been a figure of immense power and grace, and this robe was a symbol of that strength. But the guard also knew that the robe was more than just a reflection of the Queen's power. It was a piece of history, a tangible link to a time long gone. The coronation had been a momentous occasion, one that marked the beginning of a new era for the British monarchy. And this robe had been a part of that transformation. It had witnessed the moment when the Queen had been crowned, a moment that would forever be etched in the history books. The guard found himself lost in thought as he continued to examine the robe. He had never truly understood the weight of the monarchy's history before. He had always known that the royal family was important, but it wasn't until this moment that he realized just how deeply tied the monarchy was to the very fabric of the nation's identity. The Queen's coronation had not just been a ceremonial event. It had been a defining moment for the country, one that had shaped the future of the monarchy. As he stood there, the guard couldn't help but wonder what it had been like to witness the coronation. What had it felt like to see the Queen stand before the nation, crowned with the weight of history on her shoulders? He imagined the crowds outside, the excitement, the anticipation, the pride. It must have been a moment of incredible significance, one that had resonated with the people of the nation for years to come. But now, standing before the robe, the guard realized that he would never fully understand what it was like to be part of that moment. All he had was this object, this piece of history that had been preserved and hidden away for so long. And yet, as he stood there, the guard couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He was holding a piece of the past, something that no one else would ever have the privilege of seeing. The thought struck him that perhaps the robe was meant to be kept hidden. Perhaps it was never meant to be displayed or admired by the public. It was a deeply personal object, a symbol of the Queen's reign that was meant to remain private, locked away from the world. The royal family had always been protective of their history, and this robe was no different. It was meant to be preserved, to be kept safe from the prying eyes of the public. But here it was in front of him, a secret that only he knew. With a heavy heart, the guard gently closed the wardrobe again, as though sealing away something sacred. He stepped back from the wardrobe, feeling the weight of the secret settle over him once more. The robe was hidden once again, its beauty and significance concealed from the world. The guard left the room quietly, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had just witnessed. The palace was the same as it had always been, full of history, tradition, and secrets. But now the guard knew that he was a part of that history, a keeper of a secret that would never be shared. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just touched something extraordinary, something that belonged to the past, to the queen, and to the monarchy itself. The robe may have been hidden away, but the memory of its beauty and significance would stay with him forever. The guard couldn't forget what he had seen. It wasn't just the robe that lingered in his thoughts, but the feeling of it, the weight of the moment. There was something almost mystical about the way it had shimmered in the dim light, as if it were more than just a piece of fabric. It was a piece of history, a thread connecting the past to the present. And yet, now that he had discovered it, the robe seemed to weigh more heavily on him than ever before. The days passed, but the unease only grew. The palace continued its regular rhythms, with the family going about their business and the staff carrying out their duties. But for the guard, things had changed. He had crossed a line, seen something he wasn't meant to see, and now it was impossible to unsee it. The robe, hidden in the wardrobe, felt like a secret he was carrying alone, a secret that no one else knew. It wasn't just the discovery that bothered him. It was the feeling that he had somehow become part of something much larger than himself. The Queen's coronation was one of the most significant moments in British history, a symbol of continuity and tradition. And now, the robe that had been worn on that day, the very garment that had represented the beginning of a new era, was hidden away, locked in a wardrobe that only the most trusted individuals had access to. The guard felt as though he were guarding more than just a piece of clothing. He was guarding a connection to the past, to a moment in time that was too significant to be forgotten. He thought about the Queen, about what it must have been like to stand before the world, crowned with the weight of history on her shoulders. The robe was more than just fabric. It was a symbol of the power and responsibility she had carried for so many years. And yet, here it was, tucked away in a private room, hidden from the world. The guard wondered why it had been placed there, why it had been kept so secret. Had it been deliberately hidden away, or had it simply been forgotten over time? The more he thought about it, the more the guard realized that the robe's existence was a carefully guarded secret, one that had been kept within the royal family for generations. It was a part of the Queen's legacy, a piece of history that belonged to her and her alone, and now it was his responsibility to protect it, to ensure that no one else uncovered the secret that lay within the wardrobe. The more the guard thought about the robe, the more it seemed to take on a life of its own. It wasn't just a garment. It was a symbol of everything the monarchy stood for: tradition, continuity, and the unbroken link between the past and the present. And yet it was also a reminder of the weight of the monarchy, of the sacrifices that had been made to preserve its power and prestige. The robe had witnessed a moment in time that would never be replicated, a moment that had defined the future of the British monarchy. But now, the guard realized, it was no longer just a symbol of the Queen's reign. It was a reminder of the monarchy's fragility, of how easily the past could be forgotten or erased. The robe had been hidden away for so long, tucked into the back of a wardrobe, out of sight and out of mind. But in that moment, it was as though the robe was waiting to be discovered, waiting to be remembered. It was a call to preserve history, to honor the past and ensure that it wasn't lost to time. The guard knew he had to be careful. He couldn't let anyone else find out about the robe, not until he fully understood its significance. He had to protect it, just as he had been trained to protect the royal family. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that protecting the robe was more than just about keeping it hidden. It was about preserving a piece of history, a link to the past that could never be replaced. As he continued his duties, the guard found himself torn. On the one hand, he knew that he had to keep the secret of the robe safe. It was his responsibility to ensure that nothing happened to it, that it was preserved for future generations. But on the other hand, he couldn't help but wonder what the public would think if they knew about it. The robe was a part of the nation's history, a symbol of the monarchy's power and legacy. Shouldn't it be shared with the world? The more the guard thought about it, the more he realized that the robe was a symbol of something much larger than himself. It was a symbol of the monarchy's continuity, of how the past shaped the present. But it was also a reminder that the monarchy was not just a relic of the past. It was an institution that had endured for centuries, weathering the storms of history and emerging stronger each time. But the guard knew that the robe, like the monarchy itself, was something that had to be protected. It couldn't be displayed or shared with the world just yet. There was too much at stake. The monarchy was fragile, and the robe was a symbol of that fragility. It needed to be preserved, kept safe from prying eyes and careless hands. And so the guard decided to keep the secret, to ensure that the robe remained hidden away, safe from the world. The days passed in a blur, the guard continuing his duties with a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just a member of the palace staff. He was a guardian of history, a keeper of secrets that no one else could know. Each time he passed the wardrobe, he felt a sense of awe and responsibility. The robe was still there, hidden away, just as it had been before. But now it felt as though it were waiting for something, waiting for the moment when it would be revealed to the world. But that moment, the guard knew, was not yet here. The robe would remain hidden, tucked away in the shadows until the time was right, and in the meantime, the guard would continue to carry out his duties, protecting the royal family and their secrets, guarding the past as it slipped further and further away from the present. The weight of the secret was becoming almost too much to bear. The guard had always prided himself on his duty, his unwavering focus on protecting the royal family and their legacy. But now, with the discovery of the robe, something inside him had changed. It wasn't just about security anymore. It was about something far deeper, the responsibility to preserve a part of history that no one else knew about. The coronation robe, locked away in the private chambers, was more than just a relic. It was a symbol, a thread tying the present to the past, to an era that could never be replicated. For days the guard wrestled with his thoughts. He had kept the secret locked inside, his mind replaying the moment when he first uncovered the robe. The more he thought about it, the more the significance of what he had found weighed on him. He had always been trained to respect the privacy of the royal family, to keep their secrets hidden from the world. But this was different. The robe wasn't just something for the family to keep to themselves. It was a part of the nation's history, a symbol of the monarchy's strength and continuity. Shouldn't the world know about it? But there was a problem. The guard knew that if word ever got out, the repercussions could be far-reaching. The monarchy had always been a delicate institution, its power and prestige built upon a foundation of secrecy and tradition. The robe, though beautiful and historically significant, was not meant to be shared with the world just yet. It was a part of the royal family's personal history, a symbol of the Queen's reign that belonged to her alone. The guard understood the need for privacy, for the preservation of royal traditions. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this discovery, was too important to be kept hidden forever. He found himself standing outside the private chambers once again, his hand resting on the door handle. The quiet of the palace seemed to stretch around him, and for a brief moment he wondered what it would be like to simply leave it all behind. The robe, the secret, the responsibility, they were beginning to feel like a burden. But then, the guard remembered why he was there. He wasn't just a protector of the royal family. He was a keeper of history, and history, like the robe, had to be protected. With a deep breath, the guard pushed the door open, stepping into the familiar silence of the room. The wardrobe was still there, just as it had been before, the memory of the robe's intricate design flashing in his mind. His fingers tingled with the memory of the fabric, the cool touch of the gold threads, the softness of the velvet lining. The robe was no longer just an object. It had become a part of him, a part of the story he was now living. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Slowly he walked over to the wardrobe, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet room. His hand hovered over the door for a moment before he pulled it open, revealing the robe once again. This time the robe felt even more significant. It wasn't just a garment. It was a connection to the Queen's reign, a reminder of everything she had accomplished. The guard felt a deep sense of reverence as he gazed at it. It wasn't just about the beauty of the embroidery, the richness of the fabric, or the intricate details. It was about the history embedded in every stitch, the weight of the moment when it had been worn by the Queen herself. He reached out to touch the fabric, his fingers brushing against the gold threads. It felt as though the robe was waiting for him, as though it were calling him to understand its true significance. The more he studied it, the more he realized that the robe wasn't just a symbol of the Queen's reign. It was a symbol of the monarchy itself, of the endurance of an institution that had weathered centuries of change and challenge. The Queen had worn it at the start of her reign, and now the guard was holding it, not just in his hands, but in his heart. The robe, the coronation robe, was a piece of living history. It had witnessed one of the most important moments in British history, the coronation of a new monarch, and now it stood as a testament to the monarchy's survival, its ability to adapt and thrive despite the challenges of time. The guard couldn't help but wonder what it would mean if the robe were ever revealed to the public, if the world were to see it once more. Would it inspire pride in the monarchy's enduring strength? Or would it be seen as a relic of the past, something that no longer had a place in the modern world? As he continued to gaze at the robe, the guard found himself questioning his place in all of this. He had always seen himself as a servant of the crown, a protector of its traditions and secrets. But now, with the robe in front of him, he felt as though he was part of something much larger. He wasn't just guarding the royal family, he was guarding history itself, a history that stretched back centuries. The monarchy was not just an institution, it was a living, breathing entity that had endured through the ages, and now it was his job to protect that legacy. The guard's mind began to race with questions. Should the robe be displayed to the public? Would it inspire a sense of national pride, or would it only serve to remind people of the monarchy's fragility? He had always believed in the power of tradition, in the strength of the monarchy as a symbol of continuity and stability. But now, as he stood before the robe, he couldn't help but wonder if that tradition was beginning to fade, if the monarchy was becoming something that people no longer felt connected to. Perhaps it was time for the robe to be seen, for the world to understand what it represented. Or perhaps it was better left hidden, locked away in the shadows where it had always belonged. He closed the wardrobe again, the robe once more concealed from view. The decision for now was made. The robe would remain hidden, just as it had been for so many years. But the guard knew that the decision wasn't final. There would come a time, he was certain, when the robe would have to be revealed. Whether that time was now or in the future, the robe would eventually have to take its place in history, just as the Queen had done on the day of her coronation. As the guard left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important had shifted. He was no longer just a protector of the royal family. He was a keeper of a legacy, a witness to the passing of time. The robe was more than just a piece of clothing. It was a connection to the past, a symbol of everything that had come before. And as he moved through the palace, the weight of that knowledge settled over him like a heavy cloak. The guard knew that the robe, like the monarchy itself, would endure. It had been hidden away for so long, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And when that moment came, the world would remember the strength of the monarchy, the power of tradition, and the legacy of the Queen who had worn it with grace and dignity. Until then, it remained hidden, a secret kept safe in the shadows. But the guard knew one thing for certain. The legacy of the coronation robe would live on, whether it was revealed to the world or not. It was a part of history, and history, no matter how hidden, could never be erased. The days turned into weeks, and the guard found himself once again caught in the routine of his duties. He continued to perform his rounds, keeping the palace secure, his every step in time with the rhythm of the royal family's day-to-day life. But no matter how hard he tried, the discovery of the coronation robe remained in the back of his mind, never fully leaving him. The feeling that he was carrying something precious, something far more significant than anything he had ever known, weighed on him each day. The robe, so beautifully preserved in its hidden space, seemed to demand his attention, almost as though it were calling to him. He knew the importance of keeping the robe a secret. His job was to protect the family, to ensure that their privacy was respected and their legacy preserved. The robe was part of that legacy, a silent symbol of the Queen's reign. He had seen firsthand how the monarchy had endured, how the royal family's traditions had stood strong throughout the years. The robe wore, and by the Queen during her coronation, was a representation of that continuity, of the monarchy's place in history. But as time passed, the guard began to wonder if it was right to keep such a piece of history hidden away. Was it truly a secret? Worth keeping? The robe, though beautiful and important, was more than just a personal relic of the Queen's reign. It was a symbol of a country's heritage, of the people's connection to the monarchy. The guard understood that some things were meant to be kept private, but this robe, with its intricate embroidery and shimmering threads, felt too important to remain locked away. He couldn't help but think of how the public would react if they ever saw it. The coronation was a moment of national significance, a day that had marked the start of a new era for the monarchy. The robe represented that moment, the weight of the monarchy's history woven into its fabric. Perhaps, the guard thought, it was time for the world to know about it. The people had a right to see it, to connect with the past, to understand the legacy of the royal family in a more tangible way. But then the guard would remind himself of his duty. The robe had been hidden away for a reason. It was a part of the royal family's private collection, something that belonged to them alone. The public, with all their curiosity and desire for spectacle, didn't need to see it. It wasn't theirs to claim. It wasn't meant to be shared, at least not yet. The guard understood that, and yet the pull to reveal it remained strong. One evening, as he made his way through the palace, the guard found himself drawn once again to the private chambers. The door, as always, was closed, and the silence of the room felt even more pronounced now. He hadn't thought about the robe for a few days, but standing here now, he couldn't ignore it. The memory of the intricate design, the softness of the fabric, and the weight of the moment it had represented came rushing back to him. He stood outside the door for a long moment, his mind filled with conflicting thoughts. He had kept the secret long enough. But what would it mean if he revealed it now? The robe had been a symbol of the Queen's reign, of the monarchy itself. Would the people understand its significance, or would they see it as just another relic of the past? What if the robe was no longer a symbol of the monarchy's strength, but of its decline, of a time that had passed? The guard couldn't answer those questions. Not yet. But something inside him told him that it wasn't time for the robe to be revealed to the world. Perhaps there would be a moment in the future when it would be appropriate to bring it into the light. But for now, it had to remain hidden, a secret that belonged to the royal family and to history alone. With a deep breath, the guard turned away from the door. The palace was still and quiet around him, the only sound the soft echo of his footsteps on the marble floors. He knew that his decision wasn't final, that one day the robe would have to be revealed, but not today. Today, the robe would remain where it was, hidden away, preserving its place in history. As the guard moved through the halls, he found himself reflecting on everything he had learned in the past few weeks. The robe had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had always been a servant of the crown, a protector of the family and their secrets. But now, with the robe in his care, he had become a keeper of history. The weight of that responsibility had made him see things differently. He understood, now that his role wasn't just about security, it was about preserving the legacy of the monarchy, about ensuring that the past was protected and respected, even if it meant keeping it hidden from the world. The palace was full of history, full of stories that had been passed down through generations. And now, the guard was a part of that story. He had witnessed something few others would ever have the privilege of seeing. The coronation robe was a symbol of the Queen's strength, of the monarchy's endurance, and of the country's history. It was a reminder that no matter how much time passed, some things would always endure. The guard didn't know what the future held for the robe. Perhaps one day, it would be displayed for the world to see, a symbol of the monarchy's continued strength and relevance. But for now, it remained tucked away in its secret place, a piece of history waiting for the right moment to be revealed. As the guard continued his duties, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The robe was safe. The secret was intact. And for now, that was enough. The monarchy, with all its traditions and legacies, would continue, and the guard would remain a silent witness to its history, guarding the past as it slowly slipped into the future. As time passed, the guard's sense of duty and his growing connection to the coronation robe remained constant. Despite the weight of the secret he was carrying, life within the palace continued. The royal family moved through their days, busy with engagements, duties, and their private lives. To the outside world, everything seemed normal. But to the guard, the discovery of the robe had changed something deep within him. He couldn't explain why, but he had become more attuned to the hidden stories of the palace, to the layers of history that no one ever spoke about aloud. Each day, As he walked the grand halls, he felt a new awareness, as though the walls themselves whispered secrets, as though the palace itself was alive with stories waiting to be told. But the robe, with its rich history and the queen's legacy, was the one story that demanded his attention the most. It was a symbol of something greater, something more enduring than the day-to-day routines of the royal family. And yet, it was also a reminder of how fragile those routines were, how everything could change in an instant. The robe had been locked away, hidden from view for so long. But the more the guard thought about it, the more he realized that its existence could not remain a secret forever. The weight of history, the significance of the Queen's coronation, was too important to stay hidden. Perhaps it was time for the world to see it, to understand its place in the broader story of the monarchy. The robe wasn't just a part of the royal family's private history, it was a part of the nation's identity. One evening, as the guard stood in the quiet corridors lost in thought, a sudden noise broke through his reverie. He turned quickly, his heart racing. It was a soft shuffle of footsteps, not the hurried pace of a palace servant, but something slower, deliberate. Someone was walking toward him. The guard's first instinct was to retreat, to hide the secret he had been keeping so carefully for so long. But then, as the footsteps grew closer, he recognized the figure approaching. It was one of the senior officers, a man the guard had known for years. The officer had always been professional, but there was a certain air of authority about him, an unspoken sense of knowing things that others did not. The guard couldn't help but wonder if the officer had sensed that something was different, something had changed within the palace. The officer stopped a few feet from him and nodded. The guard returned the gesture, his mind still racing with thoughts of the robe, of the legacy it represented. He couldn't stop himself from feeling a surge of anxiety. The robe, after all, was something he was meant to protect, something too important to share. But the officer had a way of seeing past the surface, of understanding what others were hiding. And as he stood there, the guard couldn't help but wonder if he knew. "Everything in order?" the officer asked in his usual calm, steady voice. The guard nodded. "Yes, sir. Everything is as it should be." The officer seemed to study him for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. "I've noticed a change in the air around here lately, almost as if something's been uncovered," he said, his tone neutral, but with an edge that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. The guard stiffened, but he kept his expression neutral. He couldn't let on that he was carrying such a heavy secret. He had always been taught to maintain control, to never let personal emotions cloud his duty. But now, standing in front of the officer, he felt the weight of the robe more than ever. "I don't understand, sir," the guard said, trying to keep his voice steady. The officer's gaze never wavered. "We both know that the palace holds secrets, some of which are best left undisturbed. But sometimes those secrets have a way of revealing themselves, don't they?" The guard swallowed, his throat dry. He had never felt more exposed in his life. The officer's words seemed to hang in the air, charged with meaning. It was as if he were testing the guard, pushing him to reveal something he wasn't ready to share. But the guard stood firm, unwilling to betray the trust that had been placed in him. The officer smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I'm not here to pry. But just remember, some things are meant to be kept safe for a reason. Protecting the past is just as important as looking toward the future." With that, the officer turned and walked away, leaving the guard standing alone in the hallway. His mind was racing. What had the officer meant? Had he known about the robe? Was there something he wasn't saying? The guard couldn't tell, but he felt more uncertain than ever before. That night, he returned to his duties with a sense of unease that lingered long after the officer's words faded from his mind. He found himself thinking again about the robe and its place in the grand history of the monarchy. It was a part of the Queen's legacy, a piece of her reign that could never be replaced. But was it meant to stay hidden forever, locked away in a private wardrobe unseen by the world? Or was it time for the world to see it, to understand the true significance of the Queen's coronation? The guard didn't have the answers. He wasn't sure if he ever would. But what he did know was that the robe was more than just a piece of fabric. It was a part of something far greater, a symbol of the monarchy's strength, of the nation's enduring connection to its royal family. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for that symbol to be shared with the world. As the days passed, the guard found himself wrestling with his thoughts. He knew that his role was to protect the monarchy, to ensure its traditions remained intact. But he also knew that those traditions were built on a foundation of history, and history, in all its complexity, needed to be remembered. The coronation robe was a part of that history, a testament to a moment in time that had shaped the future of the monarchy. One evening, after his shift had ended, the guard found himself standing before the wardrobe once more. He had made his decision. The robe would be revealed, but not just yet. There would come a time when the world needed to see it, when the legacy of the monarchy would be honored in a way that could not be denied. For now, though, the robe would remain hidden, safe within its sanctuary, but the guard knew that its time would come. And when it did, the world would finally understand the significance of what had been kept secret for so long. As he stood there, gazing at the closed wardrobe, the guard realized that he had become more than just a keeper of secrets. He had become a witness to history, a part of a story that was much larger than himself. The robe, hidden in its sanctuary, would one day be seen by the world, a symbol of the monarchy's strength and the enduring power of tradition. Until then, the guard would continue his duty, protecting the past, present, and future of the royal family.